Welcome to the Not in the Job Description podcast. I'm Scott McLaughlin.
And I'm Chris Kiernan.
No matter what type of job you've had, there were situations that happened to you during work that you couldn't wait to tell your friends about.
We interview a variety of guests about some of their crazy stories from work, from entry-level food service industry jobs to doctors and attorneys. We will explore funny, gross, embarrassing, scary, and sometimes almost unbelievable stories that people have experienced while on the job.
Keep in mind that our guests or the companies they work for may be masked in order to protect the innocent, or maybe even the guilty. On today's show, we're going to talk about work, but we're also going to talk about how Chris and I got to know each other. And I think it's just interesting, our beginnings, because, I was a kid of the 80s, and I found out very early that I was born, first of all, to a 40-year-old woman, and I was kind of raised by wolves. Like, by the time my parents got around to taking care of me when I started hitting that 8, 9, 10 age, they had no interest in, putting in a lot of rules and criteria. My sisters used to complain all the time. Like, I was the only kid in kindergarten asking the other kids, like, hey, man, did you guys watch Quincy last night? And they would all look at me like I was crazy because they were all in bed by then. But I had like a 10:30 curfew then. It was one of these things where I was kind of rudderless growing up. And so I often held all kinds of jobs. And I held a job at a mall steakhouse. And that's one of the ones where I met Chris Kiernan at. And Chris, I know that's when you and I met, but what was your story growing up before then?
Yeah, a lot like you. My parents weren't as old as yours, maybe. Typical child of the 80s, divorced parents, same kind of thing, right? Like, there were definitely strong rules in the house, but like any other kid, I learned to kind of circumvent things. One of those things was by getting a job. So I just always told my dad I was at work, whether we were maybe out and about, driving around and getting into trouble or not. I may have started the day at work, got off at 8 o'clock, but then we would be out till midnight or so, right? But there were times at this mall steakhouse where we actually did work, till 11:30 or 12 on a really busy day. You and I were dishwashers.
Yep.
So on a busy Saturday, as a 16-year-old, it kind of sucked, honestly, to have to work till 11:30 at night. But we did it because it gave us that, some pocket change and let us kind of get out of the house and cause trouble.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember, I always joke that I've been employed since the 4th grade. And when I was working, delivering newspapers, my newspaper manager came over and said, the kid next door quit on the next neighborhood. Could you do that? So I ended up buying a moped and had 2 routes and could do them in the same time. So as far as I was concerned, I was like the most successful businessman in the world with my 2 paper routes. But then as I got a little older, I wanted to get a real job. And I remember going to Northland Mall, and I was walking around. This was back in the day, well before the internet. You had to go and ask people if they were hiring and if they had an application. And I walked kind of in the outdoor of this mall steakhouse, and there was a guy wearing a tie kind of bussing a table. So I walked up to him and I said, "Excuse me, are you guys hiring?" And he looked at me and he said, "How old are you?" I said, 15. He goes, "Sorry, man, you got to be 16 to work here." And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to be 16 next week." And he stopped what he was doing. He just was wiping the table. He stopped and he looked up at me and he said, "So you're out a week early before your 16th birthday looking for a job?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You start Monday." And that's how I started my employment at this mall steakhouse.
I have a very similar story. My birthday's in September. I showed up there over the summer. Same thing, right? It's not like today where they can just go online and apply. So I walk in to the same steakhouse, probably the exact same route you took, asked for the application. I did not get it from the manager. I think I probably just got it from, one of the workers or something. Go home, fill it out. I bring it back, and he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. You have to be 16 to work here." So I said, "Okay, no problem." Go home. I show up the day after I turned 16 with this old crumpled application.
The same app
that's been in my room. Probably had, Cheerio stains on it or something. And I walk in and I ask for the manager, and who happened to be the same manager that you dealt with. I gave him the application, and he goes, "Whoa, this thing's kind of beat up." I said, "Well, I picked it up like 4 months ago, but I wasn't 16 yet." He goes, "Oh, when did you turn 16? I said, "Oh, yesterday." He goes, "And you hung on to this application that long?" "Yes, sir." He goes, "All right, we have a training class starting next week. I'll get you on it." So
yeah,
Very, very similar. I think he was a good manager because he was looking for the kids that wanted to work.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, I'm not, I don't know if this is going to be a problem or not. I hope not. But the guy's name was Jay. And we're not mentioning the name of this mall steakhouse, but one of these still exists today. And it's owned by Jay, who hired both myself and Chris, back in the early or mid 80s. And, I've had a chance to go and talk to him. He is one of the most professional, nicest guys you've ever worked for. He expected and demanded things to be a certain way, but he was always very fair, just a really good guy. But I'll tell you what, Jay didn't stay at the mall steakhouse we were at for very long because we had a whole cast of characters that would roll through there. And, this steakhouse at that time was owned by this giant company named General Mills. And General Mills owned all kinds of things. And I remember, at least when I was at this steakhouse, not only were we kind of like Lord of the Flies as far as, how things worked with the politics, with all the kids working there, but there was absolutely a method to the madness. I mean, they started you bussing tables. And then after you got to learn the speed of bussing tables, you could go work in the dishwasher area. And that required not only the speed, but a lot of coordination. And so you learn how to get through that stuff. And then if you were wanting to move forward, you would move to the grill or to the hot side or the cold side. So they had all these different things. And it was actually very well organized. And it gave you something to shoot for. So lots of early learnings as a young person at this mall steakhouse.
Yeah, that's right. I started, same thing, right, as a busboy. When I started, you had already been there for probably 5 or 6 months, and you were the dishwasher. And I remember my very first day, it was Halloween, October 31st, start, I'm a busboy, I take the bus tray back, and I'm 90 pounds. I could barely lift this bus tub because those plates were big, giant, heavy plates, right? So I'm struggling to lift this thing up there, and you were the dishwasher in the back, and you're just like, who the hell is this kid? Can't even lift this tub here. So, but yeah, that's right. So then quickly, I'm a dishwasher, and then I thought I was the shit at that point, right? When you got from busboy to dishwasher, you kind of thought you were it, and then ultimately, when you become on the cook side there, then you really think,
you were able to really look down on those dishwashers.
Yeah. Right. But I think that's where our bond really started, is once I kind of moved up to dishwasher, and then we worked together a lot. And there was a method, right? You had the thrower that was loading everything. Yep. Then you had the catcher on the other side that would take the dishes and put them away. And there was this one the sort table where you had to sort all of the silverware. And one of the funny things Scott and I used to always like to try to do is just take these knives and throw them and stick them into the ceiling. It was one of those drop ceilings. So, it's almost like a styrofoam kind of board there. So we would throw them up there and they would stick. Well, gravity, over time, those things would just come falling down, and you always hoped it was when the next guy was there sorting the silverware, right? Then a steak knife comes down and about cuts his ear off.
Well, yeah, that game was really fun, and we always did it because we thought it'd be funny if it just scared somebody, because these things would hit these big steel trays that you were working on. But there was a guy from the Catholic high school who worked there, and I don't remember his last name, but his name was Steve. And he came around the corner, and he had about an inch gash on the top of his head because one of those knives cut him open, and he was bleeding pretty well to the point where we were like, okay, the knife game is over.
Right. Yes, Steve was one of those guys. We worked with him. He wasn't our favorite person, but whatever. We got along, and I didn't have a car, and I would always have to bum rides off of somebody. So one day I talked him into giving me a ride home. It was out of his way. He didn't really care for me. I didn't care for him, but I talked him into giving me this ride home. Well, I left my work shoes in his car. And the problem is when you're a dishwasher, you're wet. You're always wet.
Oh, yeah.
The water, there's water on the floor, your pants, your apron. Well, and I had these same pair of shoes by this point for like a year and a half that I'm there. And they're stinky and nasty. And I left them in his car. And like the next shift, we were both working at the same time a few days later. And he came running and, get these damn shoes, man. They stunk up my car. Because I had to take my car somewhere and have it like cleaned. It smelled so bad.
Yeah, I will tell you, we had a prior podcast where I talked about almost getting a job at Taco Bell. And the one thing that stuck in my mind that made me say no was the smell of not only the shoes, but also of the shirt and kind of the apron that we had to wear. These aprons, they were kind of thick, And when you're doing dishes and you're getting people's food all over you and water, and it's just so gross, and you're all of 16 years old, then you go home at night and you don't get home until midnight, and you have to be at school the next day at 7:45. It's not like you were, throwing all your stuff in the washing machine. Oh no, you were taking that stuff and throwing it in the corner and diving into bed. And those things stunk so bad. My sisters used to complain all the time my sister Jean complained all the time that it stunk all the time in there.
Yep, which kind of leads me to one of my favorite stories from the steakhouse here. And the smell, I guarantee you when I start this story, you're going to remember this smell. So, we sold a lot of chickens there at this steakhouse, and they were packaged in a big box with maybe 10 or 12 whole chickens on ice. And this box would set on this roller kind of container thing that would catch, as it thawed out, it would catch the blood
right,
and the guts and the nastiness. Well, as a dishwasher at night, one of your jobs was to dump the chicken blood. Nobody wanted to do it, so oftentimes it wouldn't get done. And then the next day, it would be overflowing, and then somebody would have to do it. And the smell, it was horrible. So now here again, I'm 95 pounds. I can barely lift this thing. So imagine it's like 3 feet by 4 feet, maybe 4 inches deep, filled to the rim of chicken blood and guts and nastiness that you have to dump into this drain. So I'm trying to carry it the 15 feet from the walk-in cooler to the drain, and it starts sloshing and sloshing. And next thing you know, it's a tsunami of chicken blood, and it's splattering on my face. It's in my nose. It was disgusting. And to this day, I can just still smell that
horrible.
dang chicken blood. I can almost taste it, really.
Yeah, it was horrible. There were a lot of things that we were stuck having to do there because you're in a environment with food, and food just decays over time. And when you're working in the back and it's really nasty, and you have to clean out all the grates from the floor where things have fallen in. It was just a dirty job. I don't think Mike Rowe would have liked that job. It's that dirty at times. But I remember some of the characters you would come across, and it'd be interesting to talk to Jay, the sole owner of this leftover mall steakhouse brand. I wonder how much of the bullshit that goes on behind the scenes that he was actually aware of. And he had to turn a blind eye because he couldn't admit to knowing it, or else there'd be problems. I wonder that all the time because it was a sense of frontier justice in that steakhouse. And I remember so many times when not only just some of the employees, but not Jay, some of the other managers had some crazy run-ins. And I'll give an example. I was kind of a rough kid at the time, and I really wanted to get home, and I was the dishwasher. And Chris mentioned earlier, the dishwasher is the one that always leaves last because you're the last person throwing things through the dishwasher, and then everybody's clean. I asked this kid, Jeff, from the Catholic high school, and I'd known him before because we'd played baseball together. I said, hey, man, do me a favor. Could you make sure you get all those tables out there, Bus? Because I have somewhere to be tomorrow. I got to get to bed. And he was like, oh, sure, man. And he was, probably 4'2" and just the biggest smart ass. You'd have thought he was 8 feet tall with muscles because he would just talk shit to everybody. So I'm back there for like 15, 20 minutes still doing all my duties. And I see Jeff come around the corner, and he's got this bus tub as if it's full, and he hoists it up on the counter, and he pulls out one single solitary glass and sets it down, and that was all that was in the bus tub. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he had this little smile on his face thinking he was funny. Well, we also had a hose that was right there by the dishwasher, and the temperature of the water coming out of this hose was like fire. I mean, it was so freaking hot, and you used it to get the floors. Well, I'd about had enough of him. And the fact that he was looking me right in the eye and just like, hey, I'm not helping you. I took that hose and I sprayed him and he started screaming. And I chased him as far as that hose would go. And then he turned at the end of the hall there and he was screaming the whole time. And of course, one of the managers, the guy's name was Ron, came around the corner. He was like, what the hell is going on out here? And immediately Jeff's ratting me out. He sprayed me with the hose. He sprayed me with that hose. Oh my God, I'm burned. I'm burned. And he pulls his shirt up and it is bright red. His back is bright red. And Ron said, well, why would he do that? And he goes, I just took a bus tub back there and it wasn't as much stuff in there. Ron looked at me and I said, "That's what he brought back." And Ron looked at Jeff and just went, "Huh, how about that?" and walked back in the office and closed the door. There was so much frontier justice. I think if something like that happened today, it might be on the news, but that happened all the time. I mean, there were so many instances where those kind of things happen. There were some guys from another high school. This was just a complete amalgamation of cultures and high school and of different socioeconomic backgrounds. A lot of these people, their parents made them work, and some of them, like, they had to work because they wanted to live. And we would get into it with people all the time. And there was this guy, Curtis, and Curtis was a really nice guy. But, sometimes we would get mad at each other, and so we would have to box. And it just so happened that one time Curtis came around the corner. I don't know if we bumped into each other, but it was just on. So he dropped what he had, I dropped what I had, and we started boxing. Well, we weren't like boxing to knock each other out necessarily, but, we would punch each other, and it would be pretty hard. We weren't always going for the face, but we were always kind of going at it. And I went to throw an uppercut on Curtis. And I tell you what, I'm wearing like some black suede Pumas that I'm on this real slippery wet floor. And I slipped when I went to throw this uppercut. And as I was falling, I connected more square than any other punch I've ever thrown in my life, right with his balls. And I'm telling you, I felt so horrible because he let out a sound I've never heard before. And he hits the ground, and I'm going, "Oh my God, Curtis. Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And all he's doing is he's trying to inhale. Like he can't inhale. And he gets on his hands and knees and he crawls. And I'm telling you what, these floors you do not want to be on. He crawls back to the not break room, but like the bathroom floor that we had for employees. Like you could get syphilis from the floor very easily. It was horrible. He crawls back there and just falls on his side. And he was back there for about 15 minutes. He said he couldn't breathe. He thought he was going to die. And I felt horrible. But that kind of shit happened all the time. And I always wondered again, do the managers know the kind of crap that goes on around here?
Right. I know you mentioned Jeff earlier. I remember there was a time, I think it was you and him were actually getting into it. And I was down at the catching end side of the dishwasher, and you're chasing him, and he goes running by, and I just stuck my foot out behind me and tripped his ass, and we had a mop sink in the corner, and he ended up like upside down on his head in this mop sink, and then, of course, you catch up with him and laid a few blows on him, I think. But yeah, it was just, like you said, frontier justice, and I knew you were after him, so I did what I could and just stuck my foot out and tripped his ass. So.
Coming back to think about this, I don't know if I was a manager and I was watching my younger self. I think I would have fired myself. But the thing is, I was a great worker. I always got things done. We were always spotless. But man, did I have a problem when people weren't pulling their weight. I really had a problem with that.
Yep. And then, you and I kind of started developing maybe our funny side while we worked there. And I remember the time that we were both working, super busy, but we thought it would be funny to just take our pants off and just do it in just our underwear and apron. And yes. So the one manager, she comes around the corner and makes sure that everything's going okay. She's checking on stuff. She hooked the corner, and we just kind of looked at her and smiled, gave a little wave. She turned right back around and went to the front.
Her name was Janet.
Right.
And it was so funny because we were pretty much left alone when you and I were in the dishwasher area because the place was spotless. Right. It was clean. There was nothing else to do. We just ran like a well-oiled machine. And it was so funny because she was like a management trainee at the time, wasn't she?
She was. And I actually think she may still work with Jay at that.
Oh, that's funny.
At the one that's left.
So, yeah, and great lady. But I'll never forget because I think she had to work a little bit harder, she thought, to be that much more professional because she wasn't that old. I mean, she was a younger lady. And so she needed to kind of establish herself as a manager. And to come around the corner and all she sees is our aprons and our bare asses hanging out. She just went, "Oh," and then just turned around and walked away.
Yep. And and she left us alone, I think, probably for the rest of the shift. I'm sure at some point she made a point to tell us, "Hey, guys, maybe you should keep your pants on back there." That's the kind of stuff, again, you talk about in today's world. You can't get away with that, right?
Oh, that would be front page news.
We probably would have been the poster child for HR.
Absolutely.
The stuff that we used to do back then.
Yeah, and in fact, I was looking at just what happens in restaurants and stuff. And I remember that it was always pretty common that you would just sample some of the food. I mean, that's pretty normal. And as soon as we're like cooking up a bunch of sirloin tips or something, it was pretty common that you would take a tray and you would put your sirloin tips, cook them exactly the way you want them, and you just set them right on the side, so nobody could really see them. But if there was nobody in line, you could take a bite of these sirloin tips. Well, Chris had the greatest recollection of this story. There was a lady named Marge who she would ask you if you were working on the grill. Hey, man, grill me up some of these, whatever. So sometimes it was sirloin tips. So we caught her eating these sirloin tips. I'll let you take over, Chris.
Right. So she was eating the tips. The problem was the guy that was cooking at the time, a good friend of ours, Sean, when it's really busy, you would sometimes cook ahead, right? So you would anticipate what was going to be ordered so you'd have it ready, because this steakhouse was kind of cafeteria style. You order at one spot, you hook the corner, you get your food, and you go sit down. The food's not ready, we would have to send it out. Well, when it's really busy, you got to turn these people over. So Sean had some extra tips because that was a popular item. So he had some extra ones made, maybe medium rare, that he could just warm them up if they needed to be cooked a little bit more. Well, Marge kept taking them, and Sean was getting pissed. So he takes this metal tip boat and put another one just right on top. So there was nothing in the tip boat, but it looked like it. So she comes over, lifts up the top, and there's nothing there. And the look of disappointment on her face, I think she even went, "Oh, man." And Sean's just laughing like, "Yeah, quit stealing my tips, bitch."
It was just such a great place to work. And I'm sure I did not work there more than 2 years, but it feels like it was 10.
Right.
Because I learned so much, and you were busy. I mean, looking back on it, you were busy, but all good memories.
Right.
And we were talking about, we were at a restaurant, and I saw that there was some health inspector thing up. And Chris and I were talking about this the other day. I don't think in what felt like 10 years at this mall steakhouse, I don't think in probably the 2 years I was there, I ever saw an ant. I don't think I saw a fly. I don't think I saw a mouse, a bug of any kind. I know that there was a specific time every month that we would take everything and cover it up, and we'd have people come in and spray. But it's so weird because this place worked 7 days a week, and I never so much as saw an ant in that place.
Yeah, it was definitely clean. And, I'm sure people listening are like, well, yeah, you would expect a restaurant to be clean. But let's be real. I guarantee if you walk in the back of any restaurant right now, there's going to be bugs and
Sure.
rodents, probably, just by nature. I mean, it's food.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. The other funny thing about working at a place like that, my senior year in high school, I only went to school for 4 periods or so. Then I would go to work. So I'd leave early and go to work. Well, a lot of times my shift maybe didn't start till like 3:00, and I'd be there at noon because I'm out of school. So I would just take a nap in the booth. And there was a kind of around the corner there in the steakhouse, there was a bigger party type booth that they would use for like big parties of 8 or 10 people. And it was a little bit closed off. So that was a perfect spot. I could just lay in that booth. Nobody would see me. I'd sleep for a few hours. And I one time woke up, and as I'm sitting up, there was a 2-top table right beside it. And there was an older couple, because it's 3:00, and that's when they eat dinner, of course, is at 3:00.
Right.
So this older couple was sitting there, and they don't know I'm there. And I just kind of sat up, hair sticking up, eye goop in my eyes, all groggy. And they just were mortified, like, "What are you doing?" They couldn't figure it out. I was like, "Oh, I was just taking a nap. I'm getting ready to go start working now."
You didn't even have the common sense to go, "Yeah, I was cleaning up underneath this table."
Oh, yeah, no, not at all. I just told the truth. "Oh, yeah, I was sleeping. It's time for me to go to work now."
Well, and I don't know if this is just a sign of the times. And, I think something happens to a society when there are more cameras involved, when somebody's always watching. Because when I think back about the managers that we had experienced at this steakhouse, again, Jay hired me, but he wasn't there very long. We had a cast of characters that rolled through there. When I think about some of the shit they did, like, I have managed people, hundreds of people since then, and I would not have done hardly any of these things. I'll give a prime example. Again, I was 16 years old. I may have looked a little bit older, but I was 16, and this one manager, who we will keep him nameless, he would wait until all the cold side got cleaned up, because they would take all their stuff and throw it back at the dishwasher, and then they were like, "See you later." And it always would suck, because you're watching everyone go home and you're cleaning up their mess. So this guy would come around the corner and go, "Is everybody gone?" I'd say, "Yeah." It would just be me and a guy, Chuck, who was like the real late maintenance guy. And he'd go, "You guys want some beer?" And I was 16. Chuck was 17. And we would just open up the refrigerator, and back then wine coolers were big. We'd bust out the Bartles and James or the Sun Country coolers, whatever was there. And this guy just didn't care. He's like, it's cool, Don't get it so the point where you can't get yourself home. But he really didn't care. And I think to myself, as an adult, I would never, ever offer alcohol to a minor that was working for me. I mean, it's just insane. But weird stuff like that happened all the time.
Yeah, and that particular manager actually left, I think, right after I started. So unfortunately, I never got to experience the Sunday night parties. But I do remember maybe a year or so later, there was a girl that was working as a hostess, and she would go get a cooler, like she was taking it out to a customer, like they bought one, but she would just hide it and bring it to the back and drink them. And then we were all like, "Oh, can you grab me one of those?" And so there were a few shifts that, drinking peach Sun Country coolers.
Yeah, I know that happened a lot, because, again, we were a bunch, and I don't even know how this worked. We were all, and I think most of the girls that worked that cold side, they were under 21, but they're handling alcohol. I mean, it was certainly in our purview. We could just get it. But that happened a lot. Now, there was one manager named Ron. Ron, I think, was in the restaurant business for a long time, and I wonder if he even remembers any of these stories. But I'll never forget. I have to preface this by saying I was 16 with all the wisdom of a 16-year-old. I was an idiot. There's certain things that you think are super important when you're 16. And in fairness, I mean, Ron was probably 23. I mean, it wasn't like he was 40. And he was one of the managers. And one day I remember coming in, and there's Ron, and he's smiling. And I go, "What's up?" And he said, "You ready for your new uniform?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And he pulls out a bow tie. And I said, "Ron, I'm not fucking wearing a bow tie." And he said, "You are if you're working here." And I was like, "I'm not kidding, man. I'm not wearing a bow tie." And he said, "It's part of the uniform, man. You got to put it on." And I said, "Are you serious?" And he goes, "Yeah." So he hands me the bow tie. I take it, stick it in my pocket. And at this point, I'm going out, like, I forget what the position was even called, but I'm interacting with, all the customers out in the area, getting them new drinks if they want it. So I put it in my pocket, and then about 20 minutes later, Ron comes out and says, "You got to put on your bow tie." I said, "Ron, seriously, I'm not putting on a bow tie." He goes, "If you're going to work here, you are." And I go, "Okay, I guess I'm done." And I walked right out the door. And I was devastated, because I was like, I got to get another job, but man, I'm not wearing a bow tie. That looks so ridiculous. So I didn't show up at work the next day. And then Jay calls me and says, "Hey, what are you doing? You're supposed to be at work." And I said, "I thought I was kind of fired, or I left, one of the two, but I don't want to wear a bow tie." And he goes, "What are you talking about?" So I tell him the story. He goes, "Let me call you back." So about 10 minutes later, Ron calls me. "All right, come on back. You don't have to wear the bow tie." But I mean, I don't know who was dumber, me or at the time Ron, because it was like, listen, this is the corporate standard. But something as stupid as a bow tie and forcing kids from 1985 to wear a bow tie. I mean, this is when the Beastie Boys were popular, and they're asking me to wear a bow tie. Wasn't going to happen.
Right.
So I felt like I won that battle, but it was a battle for nothing.
Well, Ron was he was a veteran manager, right? And me and another good friend of ours, Jeff, a different Jeff than we used to beat up on from earlier in the episode here. But we were going through the line, we bought our hamburgers, but we didn't pay. And we had like a little thing worked out with the cashier. She just kind of gave us a nod, and we keep on walking. Right there by the cashier's stand, there's a two-way mirror or a two-way glass that the managers are on the other side doing their work, their paperwork, counting money. But then they can also look out to see, what's going on. So we go eat our hamburgers, and we go clock in and get ready to start working. And Ron says, "Hey, Chris, Jeff, come in the office here. I'm going to talk to you for a second." So we go in the office. He goes, man, I have a dilemma here. He goes, I got a couple employees. I really like them, but I mean, they were stealing today, and I saw them, and I'm not sure what I should do about it. And our dumbasses didn't even put two and two together. We're like, oh, if they're stealing, you got to fire them.
You turn into Encyclopedia Brown, like, let's find out who it is.
Right. We're like, oh, you got to fire them. You can't keep somebody around. If they're stealing from the company, that's bad. And he just kind of looks and he goes, well, it was you guys. And now we just look like complete idiots because we're like, so we look at each other and we're like, oh, well, he goes, I tell you what I'm going to do. Pay for your food today. I don't want to see you do it again. We'll just let this one go. But, you know, he had us dead to rights, and we're basically telling him to fire us without even knowing that he was, you know, catching us on it. But you know, he was a good guy in that sense where he got it, right? And so we just learned to sneak the food better next time is all.
Oh, and I'll tell you what, Ron was funny. I thought he was hilarious. And I think that this name I'm about to give is so generic. It's not like someone's going to, you know, say, hey, don't use my name. Because there was a kid that was in our neighborhood, and his name was Michael Jackson. And Michael was a character as well. But Ron and Michael didn't get along. And Michael started working at York Steakhouse. He might have been there right before me. He might have been the person that said, hey, you should check this out. He was a little older than me. And I remember Ron and Michael they would constantly pick on each other. And at the time, Ron had a giant Soul Glow afro. I mean, it had all kinds of hair product in it and everything. And it was big. And Ron used to joke that he had such big shoulders because he worked on his hair so much. And that's where he got his workout from lifting his arms all the time. Well, one day, Michael called Ron a big Jerry curled MF. So Ron did not take nice to that. And I think Ron, even being the manager, was just like, oh, okay, well, if the gloves are off, then here it comes. So Michael's father worked at Coda, and which is the bus company in central Ohio. And he worked there, and Coda was going on strike. And Ron, I'll never forget this, because Ron was just leaning back in that manager's chair, and he had the door propped open, and I'm sitting there talking to him, and here comes Michael Jackson. And he was like, Michael Jackson. And Mike was like, hey, what's up, Ron? And he goes, hey, man, doesn't your dad work for Coda? And he said, oh, yeah, he does. He goes, damn, it's going to be a lean Christmas at the Jackson house, huh? Now, I'll tell you what, I laughed so hard. Michael looked like he was punched in the face, and those guys almost came to blows right then and there. But Ron was just laughing at him, and I thought that was the funniest shit I ever heard, because you wouldn't say that to somebody unless you really wanted to get at him. And, you know, Ron was just like, okay, you started, I'm going back at you. But it was so funny. Those guys would fight like crazy. And again, today, if that ever happened anywhere, it would be a story on an HR pamphlet of probably what not to do.
Right. And, you know, when you talk about these cast of characters, I think one of our favorites was Craig, was his name. You know, we could do a whole episode on Craig's stories, and maybe we will someday. But I think the one that really stands out even has its own little title. We'll just call it the Gourd Incident.
Oh, my God.
There was, you know, when we're dishwashers, we would get bored or we'd be caught up with stuff. So we decided to put there were some gourds around for fall decorations. So we put one in the fryer, in the French fry fryer. And after about 10 minutes, we pulled it out and we took it to the back. We wanted to cut it open and see what it looked like. Well, when we put the steak knife in it to cut it open, it kind of popped.
Yeah. And by the way, I have to tell you, these gourds we're talking about right now, the ones that we were throwing in there, like they were about the size of a baseball. I mean, it's not like we're throwing a pumpkin in there.
Right. The size of a baseball. Makes this pop. It was pretty cool. We're like, oh man, that's pretty neat. So let's do it again. So we sneak around the front, put this gourd in the fryer, go to the back. Well, now it got busy. So we're busting our ass, washing these dishes. And after about 15 or 20 minutes, we were like, at the exact same time, we looked at each other. Holy shit, the gourd. So we go to get it. We hook the corner. As soon as we hook the corner, Craig is opening up this oven to pull out a rack of baked potatoes. This gourd blew up in the fryer. Hot grease goes flying everywhere. All over this oven door that fortunately shielded him.
It was those double door Montague ovens that you could open from the middle and they kind of opened out.
Right. And so fortunately that shielded him from this hot grease. Well, Craig was like, holy shit, I almost died. Did you see that fryer just blew up? We just turned around and went right to the back.
Yeah,
And we didn't admit anything.
death.
We were like, holy shit, we about killed Craig.
Yeah, I've never been so happy for an oven door to block something, because that was crazy. But that's just proof. Like, an idle mind is absolutely the devil's workshop, and
Right.
we had plenty of it at this mall steakhouse. So we're going to go ahead now and wrap up this first episode, because I'm sure we're going to make many references to this mall steakhouse. So what have we learned today, Chris?
I think we've learned a few things, right? We've learned that at 16, managers will sometimes sneak you alcohol.
That is true. I know I learned, do not throw gourds in a hot fryer.
Correct. You
Not a
might
good
melt somebody's face.
Yeah. So I'm sure we're going to have even more stories about this as time goes on. And that wraps it up for this episode. So for Chris Kiernan and Scott McLaughlin, we're saying we'll see you at work.
Thank you for listening to Not in the Job Description podcast. If you have a story you would like to share, please let us know by sending us an email with a brief description of your story to stories@notinthejob.com.